What if the very laws that guard the monarchy's throne were secretly being rewritten? Tonight, we uncover Camilla's shocking plot that could have changed the entire line of succession. The British monarchy has survived centuries of turbulence, wars, abdications, betrayals, and revolutions. Yet, through it all, one principle has stood untouched: the laws of succession. These rules were not merely ink on parchment. They were the iron bars that caged ambition, protecting the throne from manipulation. The crown passed only by blood, lineage, and divine right. Generations accepted this as unshakable truth, a sacred wall that could not be breached. But in the quiet corners of Windsor's gilded halls, whispers began to circulate that someone was daring to reach for the unthinkable. That someone was Queen Camilla. Her ascent had already been marked by controversy and shadows. Once the outsider, she had climbed to the throne beside King Charles through persistence and power. But even as she wore the crown, murmurs followed her every step that she was not content with the ceremony alone. She wanted something more permanent, more dangerous, to rewrite the very foundations of the monarchy itself. It began with subtle changes in behavior, carefully calculated influence at dinners, and silken words whispered in Charles's ear. Staffers who once dismissed her as ceremonial began to notice the shift. She wasn't simply filling the role of consort, she was shaping conversations about the future. And then came the whispers that chilled those who dared listen closely to conversations about succession, about what might happen when Charles was gone, about whether tradition should truly bind the future. For centuries, succession had been treated as untouchable. But what if laws could be bent in the name of modernization? What if the weight of heritage could be adjusted to favor a new generation? Not Diana's children, not the line that the people trusted, but Camilla's own blood. That was the suspicion that took root. Sealed letters appeared, moving discreetly across desks, stamped with crests, but never logged officially. Meetings were rumored to have taken place under the veil of private consultation. The language was careful, always cloaked in the rhetoric of progress and equality, but the undertones were undeniable. Camilla sought to challenge the order of succession, to carve a path for her descendants where none existed. And at the heart of this looming storm stood Prince William. The heir apparent, son of Diana, the embodiment of continuity, unknowingly became the target of a plan designed to weaken the legacy he was born to inherit. Those whispers of plots, amendments, and shadow agreements would eventually find their way to him, igniting a fury that would not rest until truth was revealed. But in the beginning, it was only rumor, only suspicion carried in hushed voices through palace corridors. The staff dared not say it openly, but the fear was clear. The laws guarding the crown were no longer safe. It became more than a question of law. It became a battle between heritage and ambition, between a queen who wanted her name to be remembered for reshaping history, and a prince destined to defend the sacred bond between the monarchy and the people. What Camilla was setting into motion threatened to fracture not just tradition, but the very legitimacy of the throne itself. She was determined to place her mark on history, but in doing so, she invited a clash that could unravel the monarchy from within. But how could Camilla, bound by protocol, dare to rewrite the monarchy's destiny? The answer begins with her relentless pursuit of power. Behind every smile at royal banquets was a hidden hunger. Camilla's determination to secure her family's bloodline. For the public, those elegant dinners, glittering ceremonies, and carefully staged photographs seemed like proof of unity within the monarchy. But beneath the polished surface, Camilla carried an ambition that stretched far beyond her official role as queen consort. She was not content with standing beside Charles as history unfolded. No, she wanted her family, her children, and even her grandchildren to be woven permanently into the very fabric of the monarchy's future. This wasn't about influence at dinner tables or social recognition. It was about reshaping the laws themselves, ensuring that her legacy could not be erased when Charles was gone. In whispers that drifted through palace corridors, courtiers spoke of quiet movements taking place behind closed doors. Camilla was said to have cultivated a private network of advisors, seasoned legal minds, political strategists, and sympathetic confidants who began sketching possibilities that could alter the monarchy's most sacred traditions. These men and women operated discreetly, working under the guise of modernization and progress, terms that softened what was in truth a radical ambition. Draft proposals, never intended for public eyes, began to circulate among those Camilla trusted most. They spoke of updating succession laws, introducing new eligibility criteria, and removing barriers that had safeguarded royal inheritance for centuries. To some, these proposals looked like harmless reforms. To others, they were a ticking time bomb that threatened to detonate the monarchy's core identity. Her drive was fueled not just by desire for power, but by fear of Catherine. For while Camilla maneuvered in the shadows, Catherine was emerging as the glowing future of the crown. Every public appearance she made, every speech she delivered, seemed to cement her as the people's choice. Her bond with William was seen as authentic, her devotion to her children undeniable, and her elegance reminiscent of Diana's enduring spirit. This terrified Camilla. She knew that once Charles's reign ended, Catherine would ascend beside William, and the nation's devotion would solidify around them. In that moment, Camilla's influence would wither. Her role would be remembered only as temporary, and her own family would be pushed back into obscurity. To her, that was intolerable, and so she doubled down. Rumors swirled of conversations that stretched beyond palace walls and into the offices of government allies. Lawyers versed in constitutional law were allegedly approached with quiet questions about whether succession could be reinterpreted. Certain politicians, lured by promises of influence or royal favor, were said to have listened attentively as Camilla's confidants floated the possibility of reforms. It was a dangerous dance, one that required absolute secrecy, for if William or the public caught wind of it, the backlash would be catastrophic. Yet, Camilla believed she was too deeply embedded in the monarchy to ever face real consequences. After all, hadn't she already defied tradition to stand where she stood? Still, the risk was monumental, and the compromises she seemed prepared to make were startling. Some claimed she was willing to barter privileges, lands, and even control over certain charitable trusts in exchange for quiet support. Others whispered that she suggested tying succession reform to wider democratic modernization measures that would appeal to reformist voices. At its heart, this was never just about titles. It was about power, about rewriting the story so that history would not consign her bloodline to the margins. It was here that the first cracks began to form in her carefully constructed facade. Those who had once seen Camilla as a survivor began to suspect she was plotting something far more dangerous than survival. Her ambition, once cloaked in dignity, was becoming too visible, too reckless, too consuming. And though her allies assured her the plan was feasible, fate was already writing a darker outcome. For in her relentless pursuit, Camilla was planting seeds she could not control, seeds that would one day expose her intentions to the very air she sought to undermine. But if ambition was the seed, betrayal became the soil where this plan took root. Inside closed drawing rooms and candlelit corridors, deals were whispered that could shake the monarchy forever. While the world saw Camilla as the dutiful consort, smiling at ceremonies and lending her presence to charitable causes, another narrative unfolded behind locked doors. It was here, away from the cameras and the eyes of the public, that Camilla is said to have gathered her allies, politicians, discreet advisors, and select aristocrats who still hungered for influence. These were not formal councils or open debates. They were secret sessions, where words carried the weight of betrayal, where each hushed exchange chipped away at the traditions that had guarded the crown for centuries. The first signs of the conspiracy came in the form of carefully timed invitations. A handful of influential figures would be summoned under vague pretenses: a discussion of modernization, a consultation on legacy, a gathering to talk about the monarchy's role in the 21st century. Yet once seated within those intimate chambers, the real subject emerged. Could succession be altered? Could new conditions be written that allowed for flexibility, fairness, or modern standards? The phrasing was gentle, but the ambition beneath it was sharp and dangerous. To many present, it was clear that the purpose was not to strengthen the monarchy, but to bend it toward Camilla's vision of permanence. Evidence of these discussions began to appear in fragments. Hidden correspondence, always discreetly marked, "For your eyes only," circulated between those within Camilla's circle. Letters bearing no official seal, but carrying unmistakable authority, contained veiled references to succession amendments and eligibility adjustments. These drafts, written in vague but deliberate language, suggested new rules for who could inherit the throne. No longer would birthright alone be the defining factor. Instead, circumstances, influence, and favor might suddenly carry unprecedented weight. Such changes, if ever enacted, would have thrown centuries of order into chaos. To secure loyalty, whispers hinted that promises were offered. Some were told of potential rewards, quiet grants of wealth, access to royal privileges, even positions of power within institutions tied to the crown. Others were lured by proximity, by the assurance that siding with Camilla would ensure their voice remained influential in shaping Britain's most ancient institution. These subtle bribes wrapped themselves in language of duty and progress, but beneath them was the unmistakable truth. Ambition was being purchased, and the cost was the monarchy's stability. The danger of this scheme was not limited to its secrecy. It was the very idea of rewriting history for personal gain. The monarchy's strength had always rested on its consistency, on the people's trust that no matter the scandals, no matter the upheavals, the rules of succession would remain intact. By daring to tamper with that foundation, Camilla risked shaking the monarchy at its very core. If exposed, such an attempt would not only damage her own reputation, but could unravel the fragile bond between crown and country. And yet, she pressed forward, convinced that silence could be bought and loyalty secured. Still, questions hung in the air like smoke. Who inside the palace was aiding her? Who provided her access to these drafts, these private channels of communication? Was Charles complicit? Or was he being kept in the dark as his wife maneuvered behind the curtain of tradition? The secrecy only deepened the suspicion, and though the scheme seemed airtight, destiny was moving against her. But it was not until William stumbled upon a trail of undeniable evidence that the scheme began to unravel. He wasn't meant to find it, but once William uncovered the truth, there was no turning back. What began as an ordinary day of reviewing routine documents in a restricted section of the royal archives quickly transformed into a revelation that would haunt him. Hidden among files that bore the weight of centuries were envelopes sealed with markings that immediately struck him as unusual. They carried no official record, no clear indication of their origin, and yet they were filed where only a handful of trusted royals were permitted access. Driven by instinct, William opened one. What he discovered inside left him frozen. Drafts of proposals, carefully worded but unmistakably clear, outlined possible amendments to the very laws of succession. It was all there, the language of reform cloaked in noble intentions, but between the lines, the ambition was naked. These changes, if ever enacted, would fundamentally alter the throne's inheritance. The implications were staggering. As William read through the pages, the shock hardened into disbelief. The laws that had safeguarded the crown since time immemorial were being treated like negotiable clauses. The amendments suggested eligibility could be broadened, adjusted, or modernized in ways that conveniently benefited those outside the traditional line of succession. William could almost hear the whispers of those secret meetings, the veiled promises, the ink of betrayal, bleeding through every paragraph. It was no longer rumor or speculation. This was undeniable evidence of a scheme to undermine the monarchy itself. For a moment, the weight of the discovery crushed him. He was not just a son or a brother now. He was the heir. And that meant the responsibility of protecting the throne fell squarely on his shoulders. Yet the discovery tore at his soul. William wrestled with an inner conflict that left him paralyzed. On one side was loyalty to family. His father, already weakened by years of turmoil, and even Camilla, who despite everything was bound to Charles by vows and duty. On the other side stood the sacred trust of the monarchy and the memory of his mother, who had fought so hard to protect her sons from the darker currents of palace politics. To remain silent would mean betraying that trust. To speak out would mean tearing his family apart in full public view. The choice was impossible, yet unavoidable. In those restless nights that followed, William sought counsel not from courtiers or advisors, but from the one person whose voice cut through his doubt, Catherine. She, too, grasped the magnitude of what had been discovered, and her words became the anchor that steadied him. She reminded him that the monarchy did not belong to one person's ambition, but to the people and the generations yet to come. She spoke of their children George, Charlotte, and Louis, and the duty they had as parents to safeguard the future that awaited them. Catherine urged him to act not for himself, but for the legacy he was born to defend, the promise Diana had instilled in him when he was a boy. And still, the burden weighed heavily. William lay awake in the early hours, staring into the darkness, knowing the path before him was perilous. Every fiber of his being warned him that exposure would bring scandal, division, and perhaps irreparable damage to the monarchy. Yet, every instinct also told him that silence was surrender, and surrender was not an option. By uncovering those documents, fate had chosen him. The time for hesitation was over, And so began William's bold decision to step forward, to speak out, and to confront Camilla head-on. When William confronted Camilla, the palace walls themselves seemed to tremble under the weight of their clash. For days, he had carried the evidence in silence, his fury building like a storm. But the moment he stepped into the chamber, where she sat waiting, the truth erupted. He laid the documents before her, his voice steady, but burning with the weight of betrayal. Camilla, unflinching at first, met his gaze with cold defiance. She did not deny the drafts or the whispers. Instead, she argued with conviction, insisting she had the right to modernize the monarchy, to shape it for a new generation. To her, the laws of succession were not untouchable relics, but outdated chains that ignored reality. She declared that change was not treason, but survival. William's fury broke through like a thunderclap. He rejected every word, his voice echoing with a sharpness that left no space for compromise. The throne, he declared, belonged by birthright, not by manipulation or secret schemes. No one, not even a queen, had the authority to twist tradition for personal gain. He reminded her that the monarchy was not hers to rewrite. It belonged to history, to the people, and to the future his mother had fought to protect. The mention of Diana's legacy cut through the room like a blade. Camilla, visibly shaken, tried to rally her strength by invoking her own sacrifices. She reminded William of the years she endured public scorn, of the ridicule she had borne to stand at Charles's side. To her, this ambition was not greed, it was justice, a way of ensuring that her years of humiliation would not end in obscurity. The standoff deepened, both locked in a battle of conviction, each refusing to yield. To Camilla, this was her final chance to leave a permanent mark, to prove her reign mattered beyond ceremony. To William, it was a direct assault on the legacy of his mother and the security of his children. The air grew heavy as their words struck back and forth, and though only a handful of staff dared come near, fragments of the exchange drifted through the halls. Those who overheard whispered that they had never seen William so enraged, nor Camilla so exposed. What began as a private confrontation had already begun to ripple beyond closed doors, spreading unease throughout Windsor. Then came her warning, delivered with a trembling voice, but sharpened with menace. If you expose this, you destroy us all. It was not a plea, but a threat, a desperate attempt to frighten him into silence. But William, his resolve hardened by sleepless nights and the memory of his mother's unwavering fight for truth, refused to be swayed. He understood the cost of what he was about to do, but he also knew the price of silence would be far greater. At that moment, a line was drawn. Camilla had chosen ambition. William had chosen legacy, but William was prepared to destroy the lies rather than let them destroy the monarchy. In a move that left courtiers gasping and the nation speechless, William revealed the unthinkable, Camilla's plot against succession itself. For weeks, he had wrestled with the unbearable choice whether to protect his family from scandal or protect the monarchy from corruption. But the weight of the documents he had uncovered, the undeniable truth they contained, and the memory of his mother's legacy pressed down on him until silence was no longer possible. In the quiet of his study, he confided in only a few trusted allies, men and women who had proven their loyalty not to individuals, but to the crown itself. When he placed those papers before them, their eyes widened with disbelief, and then with dread. This was not rumor, not speculation, but evidence of a deliberate attempt to dismantle the laws that bound the monarchy together. It was treason against tradition, and William knew it had to be exposed. The day he chose to speak was no accident. Timing was everything. His statement came at a moment when the world least expected it, carefully crafted, delivered not as an attack, but as a defense of the monarchy's sacred order. He did not mention Camilla by name, but his words carried the weight of thunder. The laws of succession, he declared, are not bargaining chips, not tools to be rewritten in the shadows, but the unbreakable spine of the crown itself. Any attempt to alter them, he warned, would betray not only the institution, but the people it served. The silence that followed was suffocating, until a single voice of support broke it, and then another, and suddenly a wave of admiration surged toward him. Almost overnight, the revelation transformed into scandal. Headlines screamed across every paper: succession, betrayal, secret plot to rewrite the crown. The public, stunned at first, soon found clarity in outrage. How dare anyone, especially someone within the palace, tamper with what had been handed down through generations. Gasps turned into fury, and fury turned into resolve. Crowds gathered outside royal estates, holding signs that called for truth, for honor, for the preservation of Diana's children as the rightful heirs. In living rooms across the nation, families spoke of William with pride, saying he had done what no one else dared: defend the monarchy against those within who would corrupt it. Supporters hailed his courage, praising him not just as a prince, but as a man who had protected the future of George, Charlotte, and Louis. Mothers pointed to him as an example of loyalty to one's children, of standing firm even when the cost was high. Commentators declared that Diana's legacy lived on in her son's defiance. He had proven himself to be the heir the monarchy desperately needed, principled, unshaken, willing to put everything at risk for the truth. Meanwhile, the fallout spread like wildfire. Politicians once whispered to be connected with Camilla's network scrambled to distance themselves. Statements were issued, alliances quietly broken, and doors that once opened for her influence were slammed shut in panic. The very people she believed would shield her now abandoned her, terrified of being dragged into a scandal that threatened to consume the monarchy itself. At the same time, William and Catherine stood taller than ever in the public eye. The nation saw them not as passive royals waiting for the crown, but as the true guardians of its survival. Catherine's quiet strength, her constant support at William's side, reinforced the image of a couple chosen not only by birth, but by destiny. For the people, they became a symbol of integrity, the pair who could be trusted to lead the monarchy into a new age without betraying its roots. But if William's revelation brought him admiration, it plunged Camilla into the fight of her life. Cornered, exposed, and humiliated, Camilla fought desperately to salvage her standing. The revelation of her plot had shattered the carefully built image she had tried to present to the world. Once hailed as the resilient figure who had endured years of scorn to stand beside Charles, she now found herself painted as the architect of a scandal that shook the monarchy to its core. Tearful and trembling, she defended herself not with denial but with justification. She insisted that her motives had never been selfish, that all she had ever wanted was to modernize the monarchy for the future. In her words, the institution was outdated, rigid, and blind to the changing times. What she had sought, she claimed, was not betrayal but reform, in an effort to make the crown stronger for generations ahead. Yet, the plea sounded hollow, as though desperation had twisted her into clinging to any narrative that might lessen the public's fury. Behind palace doors, her efforts to hold on to power became even more personal. Camilla turned to Charles, the man whose devotion to her had defied decades of controversy, and begged him to stand by her side. She reminded him of their history, of the sacrifices she had made to endure the hatred of the public, of the loyalty she had shown him when the world seemed determined to tear them apart. She pleaded for him to remember that she had always been his constant, the one who had stood with him when no one else did. But Charles, worn down by years of strain, and now caught in the eye of a storm he had never anticipated, found himself paralyzed. His heart ached with loyalty to his wife, yet his soul weighed heavy with the realization that his son had spoken the truth. For Charles, it was not just a question of love, but of legacy, and the crown demanded an answer he did not know how to give. Outside, the world was merciless. The media seized on every detail of the scandal, and within days, Camilla was no longer seen as a queen consort, but as a schemer in the shadows. Headlines screamed of betrayal, of manipulation, of a woman who had tried to bend the monarchy for her own gain. Commentators dissected her every action, her past re-examined with venom, her future cast into doubt. Public sympathy evaporated, replaced with contempt. Even those who had once softened toward her now recoiled at the revelation of her ambition. The nation, it seemed, had turned. Inside Windsor, Camilla unraveled. Staff who had once admired her resilience now spoke of her as broken. They described nights of tears, of a woman who wandered the halls in silence, her face etched with the weight of humiliation. She no longer barked orders or demanded loyalty. She begged for reassurance, clutching at the remnants of authority slipping from her grasp. Those closest to her knew the truth. Her influence was fading, her power collapsing with each passing day. The monarchy that she had tried to reshape was now rejecting her like a foreign body. And in her downfall, William's star only rose higher. For while Camilla weakened, William's dominance solidified. His courage, his refusal to remain silent, had made him the voice of the future. Every moment of her collapse seemed to highlight his ascent, a stark contrast that the public could not ignore. Where she was seen as scheming, he was seen as principled. Where she faltered, he stood taller. The balance of power within the palace was shifting, and Camilla's desperate defense only hastened that change. But the monarchy does not forgive betrayal easily, and Camilla's fate was about to be sealed. The queen consort, who dreamed of rewriting history, suddenly found herself erased from the future she longed to control. For all her careful maneuvering, all the whispers of power she had tried to shape into permanence, Camila now stood isolated. The network she once believed unbreakable began to crumble with startling speed. Politicians who had quietly entertained her ideas were now the first to run, each scrambling to protect themselves from the fallout. Statements of denial flowed like a tide, each one distancing them further from her, each one another blade, cutting away the fragile alliances she had built. She had thought loyalty could be bought or bound, but when the scandal reached its peak, not a single hand remained extended in her defense. Beyond the palace gates, the fury of the public roared louder than any courtly whispers. Protests swelled outside royal residences. Banners demanding her resignation waved high in the air, and chants thundered through the streets. To the nation, Camilla's attempt to tamper with succession was no longer a private betrayal but a public crime against tradition itself. Generations had trusted the monarchy's continuity as sacred, untouchable, and now here was a queen consort accused of trying to corrupt it. The people, who had once been reluctant but willing to accept her beside Charles, now turned with a vengeance. Every cheer that had once reluctantly softened her image transformed into outrage that demanded her downfall. In sharp contrast to Camilla's decline, Catherine's quiet presence began to shine more brightly than ever. She did not need fiery speeches or public declarations. Her calm, steady demeanor, her unwavering support of William, and her unspoken embodiment of Diana's grace reassured a shaken nation. Where Camilla was seen as divisive, Catherine was seen as stabilizing. She became the figure the people turned toward for reassurance, the face they associated with the monarchy's future. In every comparison, Camilla's collapse only magnified Catherine's strength. And with each passing day, the people's affection for William and Catherine deepened into trust. Charles, meanwhile, was thrust into the cruelest of positions. His wife demanded his loyalty, but his son demanded the protection of the monarchy's truth. To choose one was to wound the other, and so Charles chose silence. But in that silence lay his undoing. The people saw not a strong king, but a weakened man, his authority eroded by scandal, his voice absent when the monarchy needed it most. That vacuum of leadership only made William's defiance more powerful, his courage more undeniable. Charles, who had once believed he could balance both wife and heir, found himself standing in the shadows of his own reign. Even within the royal family, the tide turned swiftly. Princess Anne and Prince Edward, figures often overlooked in the drama of succession, stepped forward in quiet but decisive ways. Both lent their weight to William, reinforcing his stand as protector of tradition. Their loyalty sent a message that could not be ignored. The crown itself rejected Camilla's ambitions. No matter her title, she could not bend an institution that had survived centuries of storms. The monarchy then moved to reassert its unbroken truth. A public statement reaffirmed the sanctity of succession laws, declaring them untouched, unaltered, and beyond the reach of personal ambition. It was a death sentence for Camilla's vision. What she had once sought to modernize was now resealed as untouchable, her name tied forever to the attempt that failed. From the grand halls to the crowded streets, it was clear. The queen consort had lost not just her influence, but her place in history. And yet, in Camilla's collapse, lay the seeds of William's rise as the unquestioned defender of the throne. In exposing Camilla's plot, William did more than save the monarchy. He honored the promise he made to his mother's memory. To the world, he became more than a prince waiting in the wings. He became the defender of Diana's bloodline, the man who stood firm when corruption threatened to poison the throne. The nation saw in him not hesitation, but conviction, and in Catherine and their children, they saw the unshakable future of the monarchy. His defiance against secrecy and manipulation marked him as the royal who refused to be silenced by family politics, the heir who would not bow to ambition at the expense of truth. In the eyes of millions, William secured the throne not just for George, Charlotte, and Louis, but for the ideals of integrity and honor that Diana herself had embodied. Her shadow, her memory, seemed to guide him, reminding the world that legacy is measured not by titles seized, but by truths defended. And so, while Camilla's ambitions crumbled, William's defiance secured not just the crown, but the future itself. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.